Good morning. Bonjour tout le monde. We've called you today to speak about the ongoing erosion of human rights globally and also about the Beijing Olympics. In this second wave of the pandemic, human rights crises around the world and outside of our borders are not receiving the same attention as countries struggle to bring the pandemic under control. This has resulted in something that I am calling COVID cover. What this means is that the pandemic has been used as cover to further erode civil liberties and fundamental human rights around the world. In fact, Amnesty International last year made this point and said that the pandemic is being used to clamp down on opponents while doing little to protect vulnerable populations around the world. Some of the cases in point recently, Myanmar. Protesters there are demanding that power be restored to the deposed civilian government after the military coup that happened last week, and they're seeking the ruling party to be released, those who have been detained. We know that there are reports just today about water cannons, rubber bullets being fired into crowds of demonstrators that have been opposing the coup. And so this is a situation that is quickly evolving and quickly deteriorating. In the case of Russia, protesters there have been demanding the release of Kremlin critic Alexei Navalny, who was arrested in mid-January and who has been sentenced to 3 years in prison. Countries, including Canada, have condemned a court ruling, that court ruling jailing Mr. Navalny. And we know that thousands of people have been detained by police, including many beatings. We think that up to, at the latest count, more than 5,000 had been detained by the police. In Hong Kong, we have seen a systematic and steady erosion of civil liberties in the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region, including the introduction of a national security law that was imposed last year and the recent arrest of over 50 pro-democracy defenders. And again, with China, in the case of China and their treatment of the Uyghur Muslim minority population, there is a very credible case that the Chinese government is carrying out the crime of genocide against the Uyghur people. Human rights groups have said that the Chinese government is gradually stripping away the religious and other freedoms of the Uyghurs, culminating in systems of mass surveillance, detention, indoctrination, and even a program of forced sterilization and systematic rape. Our parliament and one of its subcommittees has concluded that China's treatment of the Uyghur population amounts to a genocide. The United States State Department has concurred with the current administration, concurred with the outgoing administration in concluding that the Chinese government's treatment of Uyghur Muslims is a genocide. And so there is a growing international consensus that what we're seeing is a genocide. Evil does not sleep, and evil will fill vacuums. And so even in this second wave of the pandemic, Canada must remain vigilant and outspoken when confronted with gross human rights violations. We must continue to work with our allies, not only to condemn such violations, but also to bring rogue nations, such as the ones I mentioned, and others like Zimbabwe, Venezuela, Syria, back into compliance with international law. And this brings me to the Olympics. As we know, more than a dozen federal MPs from across parties wrote calling for the 2022 Winter Olympics to be relocated from Beijing, citing in particular a genocidal campaign by the state against Uyghurs and other Muslim minorities. It's important for people in Canada to know that it is in fact the federal government that can ultimately decide whether our nation's athletes will take part in any Olympics. In this case, the decision should be clear. Canada should support the relocation of the 2022 Winter Olympics. As someone who has a fair amount of experience in public diplomacy and international affairs, I would really like to underline that this is not a diplomatic row. This is genocide. and our response has to correspond to the scale of the human rights violation. And while I also strongly believe in the power of sport, with the greatest of respect to the CEOs of the Olympic and the Paralympic committees, China has proven itself to be incredibly resistant to liberalization of human rights and fundamental freedoms. There is no reason to credibly believe that the celebration of the 2022 Olympics in Beijing, alongside a genocide, will produce any such results. And so at this moment, the job of Canada and the International Olympic Committee and any other nations who condemn the genocide in China should be to work with each other to find an alternative venue or venues for the 2022 Olympics. In fact, we would say that Canada should consider whether it would be a feasible venue and able to offer itself as an alternative venue for the 2022 Olympics. As a country that has hosted the Olympics in the past, as recently as 2010, it's impossible that we may have the infrastructure that remains intact and operational to be able to make such an offer, perhaps on our own or perhaps jointly with the United States, who also has a history of hosting Winter Olympics. This is the kind of creative solution that Canada used to be known for and can be known for again. This is the kind of thing that a middle power like Canada can do, using its convening power and its creativity to find a solution to a very difficult problem for all of the athletes looking forward to the 2022 Olympics. And while I would say that it would be a wonderful byproduct of the relocation of the Olympics, if it proved to be a wake-up call to the Chinese government, it is enough, I say, to know that Canada has not participated in providing a global platform for a country that is perpetrating a genocide. If an ongoing genocide is not reason enough to relocate a sporting event, then my question is, what is? Alors en français, je voulais souligner aujourd'hui que dans la deuxième vague de la pandémie, qu'il y a beaucoup de crises de droits de la personne partout dans le monde qui ne reçoivent pas suffisamment d'attention. Malheureusement, il y a beaucoup d'États qui utilisent la pandémie comme une voile pour participer et promulguer des violations des droits de la personne dans leur pays. L'exemple de Myanmar, où il y a des manifestations et où le gouvernement, où les forces armées sont en train de répresser les actions et les manifestations dans les rues d'une manière assez violente. Dans la Russie, où Alexei Navalny, le critique, était condamné à 3 ans en prison et où les manifestations, là aussi, ont été supprimées par le gouvernement. Dans le Hong Kong, où le gouvernement chinois a travaillé systématiquement pour assurer que les droits de la personne dans le territoire soient affaiblis. Et dans la situation des Uyghurs en Chine, où là, on sait qu'il y a un cas très crédible que le gouvernement est en train de perpétrer un génocide contre les peuples Uyghurs. C'est la conclusion des groupes de droits de la personne, c'est la conclusion de notre sous-comité parlementaire, c'est la conclusion du département de l'État aux États-Unis. Alors, c'est clair que il y a un consensus qui est en train de croître, qu'il y a un génocide qui se passe maintenant en Chine. Alors, il faut assurer ici au Canada qu'on reste vigilant et qu'on condamne toutes ces actions répressives des droits de la personne et aussi qu'on travaille avec les autres États pour assurer que le droit international et les droits fondamentaux soient respectés. Dans le cas des Olympiques, Il y a plusieurs membres, une douzaine de membres, de députés des partis au Parlement qui ont fait l'appel pour que les Olympiques soient placés dans un autre pays. Nous sommes d'accord avec ça et c'est en fait, au final, c'est le gouvernement fédéral qui a le pouvoir de le faire. C'est très clair que le gouvernement ne devrait pas soutenir ne devrait pas soutenir la célébration des Jeux olympiques au Beijing en 2022 et devrait travailler avec la communauté internationale pour identifier des autres stades, des autres pays qui seraient réceptifs à faire hôte à ces Olympiques. Alors, pour nous, je voulais suggérer aujourd'hui que peut-être le gouvernement du Canada, notre pays, pourrait inviter les athlètes de célébrer les Olympiques de 2022 ici au Canada. Nous avons célébré les Olympiques ici en 2010 et beaucoup de ces stades, beaucoup de notre infrastructure reste encore et aussi nous sommes très proches de notre pays qui a l'expérience de célébrer les Olympiques de l'hiver. Alors, c'est ce type de solution créative que le Canada peut offrir aux communautés internationales, même comme un pouvoir moyen. C'est le type de solution qui serait nécessaire dans ce cas. Et la question, c'est si un génocide n'est pas suffisamment de raison de considérer déplacer les Olympiques, quelle serait une bonne raison? Et avec ça, je prends des questions. Merci. With that, I'll take questions.
Thank you, Madam Paul. So we will now begin the questions. One question, one follow-up. Nous allons commencer les questions du média. Une question, un suivi. Please use the raise hand feature if you'd like to ask a question. Veuillez utiliser la fonction de lever la main si vous voulez poser une question. Est-ce qu'il y a des questions? Are there any questions, please? No questions at this time? Okay, well, thank you very much. This concludes the press conference with Madam... Oh, wait, we have a question. Okay. Man, would you like to go ahead, please, from the Canadian Press?
Hi, good morning. Thank you, Mrs. Paul. I just want to ask whether you have been in touch with any other, political parties regarding this, the NDPs, the Liberals, anyone, were there any discussions about this? Is this like something that came up recently, maybe? I mean, I'd like to hear some, if you have, if you have some, if you have any kind of conversations around, if you had any conversations around this before?
Well, as I mentioned, if I understand your question correctly, as I mentioned, there was a letter that was signed by a dozen parliamentarians, amongst others, calling for a relocation of the 2022 Winter Olympics. Two of our MPs are signatories to that letter. And so to the extent that we were invited to sign that letter, of course, we were aware and very hopeful that this would be a letter and an initiative that would receive cross-partisan support. So we're very happy to see that it has, and we're hoping that that will grow. And again, this is a case of genocide that we are talking about. This is something where there shouldn't be any question of how we respond. And we hope that there will be a growing support for this within our parliament and across party lines. This really should be something that all of the parties can agree on.
Thank you very much. Is there any other maybe steps or, things Canada should do to maybe, respond to the human rights violations in China and in other countries you listed in your opening remarks?
Well, as I said, it sounds very technical, but what you always want to do when confronted with gross human rights violations, of course, is to speak out very strongly and to very vocally condemn those actions. But then you want to convene as often as possible with international allies in order to consider all of the options that are available to you in order to get those states back into compliance with international law. and that range, there's that full range. It can involve anything from quiet diplomacy all the way to sanctions and everything in between. And so all of these are situations like that. I understand this is a very difficult time for us and of course for many countries around the world, but we need to make sure that this is not an opportunity, as I said, for evil to fill a vacuum. And so that requires us to work multilaterally with our partners in venues like the United Nations and in other multilateral venues to consider all of the appropriate steps that we can take to encourage compliance where that's possible and to force compliance where necessary.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions, please? Est-ce qu'il y a d'autres questions? No? D'accord. So this concludes the press conference with Green Party leader Annamie Paul. Ceci conclut la conférence de presse avec la chef du Parti vert, Annamie Paul. Merci. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup.